Welcome to this episode of Let's Talk 716 Sports. Today, my special guest is Ryan McCaughill from Soviet Union Sports.
Hey man, how you doing?
Doing good. Anything like that you would like to talk about the Sabres?
Yeah, I mean the Sabres we should get excited for the Sabres. They start playing tomorrow. The NHL is back after however many days of being away from us and our prying eyes. I know that, you and I, we both had the Buffalo Bills to watch and pay attention to for the last couple of months. And, they're on this not necessarily historic, but a pretty nice playoff run, something that we haven't seen in almost 3 decades. Certainly first thing I've seen in my lifetime. But the Sabres are back, and it's a different league. I mean, literally a different league because of all the COVID restrictions. They're not in a bubble, but they went in the NHL went and redid all the divisions. So all of Canada's in a division. Buffalo is in its own division with teams like, Philadelphia, New Jersey, the Capitals, Boston, a bunch of teams all thrown together. So, and that's all they're playing. They're not going to go and play San Jose. There's not going to be a West Coast, 1 or 2 West Coast runs either this season. So it's going to be certainly interesting to play the same team, the same group of teams a number of times throughout the season. But that's something that I talked about this morning. Sorry, I keep looking. I keep getting updates and stuff. The NFL is full of news today. But yeah, that's something that I talked about this morning and on today's episode of my hockey podcast, The Rivalry. And we kind of did a deep dive into each of the divisions. Man, I can't, on one hand, I'm excited because hockey's back. And on the other hand, Jeff Skinner is skating on the 4th line, and we're paying him like $6 million over the next decade to do that. And I just don't know how to feel about that right now. So with everything that's happening, I'm excited because hockey's back, but at the same time, I'm personally not expecting much from the Sabres this season.
What do you think of the addition of Eric Stahl?
I got to tell you, outside of Hall, Stahl was probably my favorite addition. And I touched on this in the episode that we dropped today as well. I talked about this with my co-host Cody, who's a Leafs fan. It's where you get the rivalry name from. Because the Sabres have been talking about a veteran presence for so long and wanting a veteran presence, but they were keeping guys around like Zach Bogosian, or they were adding names like Vladimir Sabaka, who have nothing but years under their skate blades. They don't have that leadership that the Sabres have been hoping to get with some of those veterans. And I think Stahl has already come into Buffalo and shown that he can be that veteran presence. He's already spoken to the media about the younger guys, how he's helped them with developing their play and some of the mechanics that they need to adjust to make it on an NHL roster. And that's just something we haven't seen from guys before. That's not something that you're going to get out of Vladimir Sabaka or Okposo. Definitely what isn't something you're going to get out of guys that have been around like Girgensson, or, you weren't going to get it out of Bogosian. So I'm really glad that you asked me that question, because outside of Hall and his playing ability, Stahl is honestly probably my favorite addition that they've made this offseason. But so far, I like everything Kevin Adams has done as a GM. He's been really good with the contracts. He's been really good with who he's bringing in, and so in the draft, the last draft, for how short of a time he and his very small front office had to put together a draft that wasn't bad. I think they did a fantastic job. I'm really excited about more than just the first round this year, for prospects that they brought in. So I'm hoping to see them. Obviously, Quinn up in Buffalo now seems to be the way things are headed, but I'm excited to see a lot of these names like Matteo Constantini, who is on the Buffalo Junior Sabres. I'm excited to possibly see them in Rochester or even Buffalo in the next couple of years.
What do you think of JJ Paterka, that that guy from Germany?
Yeah, I think a lot of people going into this last draft, because Kevin Adams was so new. He doesn't have any prior general manager experience. In fact, he was on the Buffalo Sabres coaching staff at one point, prior to him working at Pagula Sports. So he doesn't really have any executive hockey management experience outside of working with the Buffalo Junior Sabres via the hockey academy at Harbor Center. So a lot of people were really interested in how he was going to perform going into that draft. And like I said, I think he did a fantastic job, because even though Germany in the World Juniors was not impressive, JJ Paterka, however, was impressive. And I think it says a lot about somebody who's so young and can produce the way he did. Like you said, he's a defenseman, but he was, scoring goals and getting points as well as playing defense. So he's that two-way forward, or that two-way defenseman that I think that the Sabres have been looking for, and have been hoping to get out of some of these players that we have on the roster now for a long time. And I think he's genuinely the first legitimate one that we may have. I didn't catch the actual games, but I caught a lot of his highlights, and a lot of people seem to be on the Paterka train. I was, after he got drafted, and doing some research into him. But I'm excited for him. Like I said, I'm excited for a lot of the draft picks that we got in our first year under Kevin Adams, because I just, and I can't, obviously, the front office is small, so it's not just on Kevin Adams, but I can't remember his first name, but Nightingale is the director of scouting for the Sabres right now. So he did a fantastic job with putting the reports together and advising Adams. So I'm excited to see the direction that this front office moves in the next year or so, especially with all the one-year contracts that they have. But like I said, these prospects are going to be amazing to look at in the next couple of years.
What do you think of Paterka, Cousins, Johnson, and Quinn coming?
Yeah, so I'll focus on Quinn and Johnson, just because those two seem to be ones that that Sabres fans kind of hone in on. So we just touched on JJ Paterka. Obviously hope to see him up in Buffalo in the next couple of years, at least Rochester in the next year or two. Cousins is an immaculate talent. I think we've been able to see that already. One of the bright spots that we can take from a Jason Botterill-led Buffalo Sabres front office. But I want to focus on Quinn first, and then Johnson after that, because Quinn, a lot of people were upset that we took Quinn, because there were guys like Marco Rossi, and specifically Rossi, but then Cole Perfetti, who were on the board that had not been drafted yet when the Sabres drafted it. I want to say 7. I think maybe 7th is where we were drafting.
I think we were drafting 8th.
Okay, so 7, 8, somewhere around top 10, let's just say, at a top 10 pick. And a lot of people were upset because Rossi and Perfetti look more NHL ready. And I don't disagree based off of their play, but I think to draw a comparison to the NFL, that's like saying that you want Rosen and then being upset that they draft Josh Allen without being able to see what they're able to do with him first. I think Rossi isn't necessarily at his ceiling in terms of play and development, but I don't think that he goes much further than he's already at. Whereas I think Quinn is already, and we saw it with the World Juniors, we saw it in his highlights before. I think Quinn is already a very good hockey player, but I think his ceiling is a lot higher in terms of development. And that's something that we saw for, me and you being Bills fans. That's something that we saw with Josh Allen. A lot of people were upset because Rosen looked the most NFL ready in that draft. And a lot of people didn't like the Josh Allen choice. But, Rosen has he's bounced around to 2 or 3 teams now in the NFL. And Josh Allen is the first quarterback out of that 2018 draft class to win a playoff game before Baker and Lamar just did this past weekend as well. So it's all about development and developing well. That being said, the Sabres do not have a fantastic track record of developing prospects, especially young prospects. So I'm hoping that has changed under this new front office. And I think we've seen some of those things in the ways that they cleared house and the people that they brought into Rochester. But to flip that, Ryan Johnson is a defenseman that was drafted towards the end of the first round in Jason Botterill's last draft class. And I think it's almost the same thing because a lot of people were upset that we drafted Ryan Johnson, but Ryan Johnson has shown tremendous development and tremendous improvement from where we saw him and where we thought that he was in terms of his play. He obviously still has a long way to go. And again, the Sabres do not have a proven track record in recent history of being good at developing players in the modern NHL. So will Quinn, out of the two of them, I think Quinn probably makes it to the NHL before Johnson, but I think Ryan Johnson most definitely has the opportunity to make the jump to not only the AHL, but the NHL at some point down the line. But I just wanted to focus on those two because Sabres fans seem to dial in on them without realizing that, if you watch the Buffalo Sabres Embedded or the Blue and Gold, I forgot what they're calling it now, the phone call that Kevin Adams had with Brandon Bean pointed out that he's drafting these guys at 22, 23, 24 years old. Heck, Tremaine Edmonds got drafted at 21. Very young for the NFL. But you're drafting guys in the AHL who are, 18, 19 years old. And so NHL GMs kind of have to play a little bit of, rubbing the mystical ball to kind of try and guess where these guys are going to be 3, 4, 5, 6 years down the road in terms of development and play and helping them at the NHL level. So the NHL is very hit or miss in its drafting. But I think that there's nothing that we have to worry about at this moment in time because, like I said, these guys still have a long way to develop.
How do you think Kevin Adams and Ralph Krueger will do during the season?
Well, so when you talk about Ralph Krueger right now, you have to bring up the fact that Jeff Skinner is skating on the 4th line, which isn't a great look for a franchise like the Sabres, who have historically handed guys that play really well, really big, really long-term contracts, and then they stop playing well. Ville Leno, to be named. I know that gives Sabres fans nightmares because we just finished off paying his contract, I think, last season. But it's also a good thing because you want a coach that takes Jack Eichel and puts him on the 3rd line if he's not playing well. You want a coach that takes Jeff Skinner and puts him on the 4th line if he's not playing well. Something that I had forgotten about that my co-host Cody reminded me of this morning. Last year, the coach in Washington placed Alex Ovechkin on a lower line. I think the 3rd line, I think Cody had said, because he wasn't playing well. And so that's either going to hurt or it's going to help. But the hope is that it motivates them to earn their way back higher into the lineup. That being said, Skinner should not need Hall and Eichel to play well. He should be able to drive his own line, and I think that that's the hope that Kruger is trying to get out of him. I still think that Kruger is a good NHL coach. It's just I think the question now is over this season and maybe the next, is he a good coach for the modern NHL? And working with these more modern players. That being said, I think Kevin Adams is not your typical NHL GM. I think he's a guy that is going to be more open to trades, to signing free agents throughout the season, and to moving on from players quicker than they typically do. Most of the guys that they signed this offseason, including Taylor Hall, are only one-year deals. And so I think we still have a few contract spots open out of the 50 total that we can have as an organization between the NHL and AHL. I think you potentially see some free agent signings, maybe in the middle of the season, or even in the middle of the season right before the trade deadline, because you might see some guys get traded for some draft capital to rebuild our prospect pool, and then those freed up contract spots can be free agent players that the Sabres might think have an opportunity to shine somewhere on a third or fourth line, or maybe somewhere in the AHL. So I'm excited. I just don't know I don't know how well Kruger and Kevin Adams are working together. I don't know what their chemistry is. Which is, the opposite of looking at Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott, where you can see that chemistry. The NHL is more buttoned up and more secretive about most things. So I don't necessarily know what their chemistry is. They may be on two different ends of the spectrum, and we may end up with a new head coach in the next season or two. I hope that does not happen. I really hope that does not happen. I'm not hearing anything about it happening, so don't worry. But yeah, it's just there's a lot of questions because the NHL is typically quiet on these types of fronts.
How do you think the Bills did overall against the Colts on last week Saturday?
Yeah, so the Colts were one of my teams that 2 or 3 years ago I said, hey guys, like anybody that I could tell to pay attention to the Colts, I was telling them to pay attention to the Colts. Pretty much from the time that they had signed Frank Reich a couple of years ago. The Colts, the Browns, the Cardinals, and at the time, 2017, 2018, I was including the Jaguars. They imploded to rebuild for absolutely no reason. So we'll just pretend that I didn't say the Jaguars. But I think hands down, the Colts were the toughest matchup that the Bills could have played. Because when I look at these other teams in the AFC and I look at these other teams in the NFC, I don't see teams that can execute well on all three phases of the game. It includes special teams, potentially all four phases of the game with coaching. Frank Reich is, I think, a phenomenal coach, but I think he outsmarts himself as well, and I think his coordinators do. And I think that we saw that last weekend. There were a lot of missed calls, times when they should have gone for things or maybe done a different play call where they were playing it safe more than playing it risky, which you cannot do in the playoffs because that's how you lose games. But I think Buffalo, I think the only reason we won is honestly because of that fourth phase, because of Sean McDermott and the coaching staff, because the Colts offense is fantastic, especially their run defense. Obviously their run offense is fantastic between Jonathan Taylor. If Marlon Mack was healthy, that would have been good to see too. And then Nyheim Hines is very explosive. Their passing offense is atrocious, not fantastic. But Jack Doyle scoring for the first down in the following play with the touchdown, and then Michael Pittman Jr. being able to grab those balls almost out of thin air for those big downs and getting them back into first down areas. So, and then their defense, fantastic in pretty much every area. It's hard to cover the Bills wide receivers, but the Bills running game has been almost non-existent for all season. So they were really good at stopping that. And special teams. I mean, you saw that Rodrigo Blankenship was, I mean, putting them at their literally their 5-yard line, their 10-yard line, their 15-yard line, and putting them well deep into their own territory. So I think they were the best team that we possibly could have played. But there were a number of things, again, that factored into them losing. I think Frank Reich outsmarting himself was one. But the other one we saw in the fourth quarter is when Phillip Rivers is down, even by 3 points, he starts to get very antsy, and he was throwing the ball to nobody, literally to the sideline. That's something that you can't do. And Phillip Rivers that's why he's not a playoff quarterback. That's why he doesn't have any rings. And then on top of that, our passing game, being able to get those balls out and to protect Josh was also extremely critical, as well as our special teams. Again, Tyler Bass is a fantastic kicker. Corey Bajorka is one of the best punters in the league as well. And so it's just one of those things where they were bad in one area, and that area was coaching and outsmarting themselves. And that's why we took it by 3 points. But I don't think that the Ravens are that tough of an opponent. I don't think we may end up seeing Cleveland in the AFC Championship if Cleveland beats the Chiefs. But if not, I don't think that it's a problem for Buffalo to beat the Chiefs. It's not a problem for Buffalo to beat Cleveland either. And none of the teams on the NFC side have all 4 phases of the game locked up either. So, I mean, this may very well be the year that Buffalo ends up in the Super Bowl. I don't want to curse anything, but this may very well be the year that the Bills end up in the Super Bowl.
And I watched some of that game on Saturday, and that Rodrigo Blankenship, he missed a field goal too.
Yeah, the 33-yarder.
That 33-yard field goal went off the upright.
Yeah, and that's typically, and that's one of the things I was on. I have a friend of mine who's a big Colts fan that lives here in Buffalo, and so I was on his. We did a pregame show, and then we did a postgame show. And on the postgame show, we talked about how uncharacteristic a lot of what happened with Indianapolis was. And one of those things was Rodrigo Blankenship missing, because he's one of the best kickers in the league right now. Buffalo and Indianapolis have 2 of the best special teams in the league at the end of this season, and especially going into this postseason. So it was uncharacteristic of him to miss that. But again, it's misses like that put you out of games. And unfortunately, the Colts are out of the playoffs and the Bills are not. We've moved on.
Do you think the Bills personnel needs to change their scheme somewhat when they're only up by like 3 points or something?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. There's a couple of routes that we can go with that. One, we need a run game. I mean, it's pretty apparent we can't rely solely on the passing attack. We need to run Singletary to the outside, and whoever Zach Moss is out for the rest of the year, for however long Buffalo's in the playoffs. So whoever replaces him, like say Antonio Williams or TJ Yeldon, needs to be able to go on the inside, make it through the lines and exploit those holes. But then there's also guys like Knox that need to learn how to catch the football in situations where, 4-year-olds can catch the football. He has a habit of being able to catch almost impossible football throws, but misses the easy ones. So in terms of personnel, I mean, we need to figure out a run game, and we need our tight ends to catch. But in terms of scheme, playoff Dable is not my favorite Dable on the offensive side. He's just not. I don't know why he changes things for the playoffs, it seems. But he's not my favorite version of Brian Dable. but luckily we've been kind of pushing more and more and being more aggressive throughout the game, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Because you would see during the season we would get up by a touchdown or two, and we would start playing like prevent defense, which is something that you usually go into if you're trying to stop the team from scoring in the last 60 seconds of the game, but your people are way more spread out than they usually are. They're more in the backfield trying to prevent something like a Hail Mary or just a long ball downfield. And we were seeing that during the regular season with like 3-4 minutes left in the fourth quarter. I mean, sometimes if we were up by 3 or 4 touchdowns, like you were seeing it in the third quarter even. And it was just like, why are you taking your foot off the gas pedal and slamming on the brakes when this is clearly working? And then teams would find their way to climb back up 2 or 3 touchdowns and potentially win the game before the offense would start to ramp up again and the defense would lock it down. And then that being said, not having Star Lotulelei this year was a huge hole in our run defense. So that's something that has to get addressed in the offseason. I know he opted out for COVID. I have no idea if he'll be back in 2020, in the 2021-2022 season. But yeah, it seems like our run defense right now, we need to figure out, especially if you're playing Baltimore, you kind of have to figure out what your run defense is because the running threat is there from the running backs and the quarterback.
Do you think that, like, since Lamar Jackson is a running quarterback, do you think that maybe, our defensive coordinator, will change his scheme for this game?
I honestly don't know what Frazier's going to do. I mean, by no means am I an expert on play in schemes. I'm more of a personnel guy. I like the offseason a lot because I like the trades and the who's getting fired and who's going where and who's getting cut and who's getting signed. That's more my speed. And I didn't play football, so I by no means have any personal knowledge of what Frazier may or may not do. What I know is that it's going to be difficult because of Lamar Jackson, because he can throw accurate balls downfield to decent wide receivers, and he can also run. So the problem is if you bring the pressure to the quarterback, if you blitz, if you send a number of guys towards the quarterback instead of dropping back, you're going to cause him to run. And if you cause him to run while you're bringing pressure, your guys are all tangled up and you have less guys to chase down the quarterback. But if you don't bring the pressure, he's going to have a lot of time to throw and let those plays downfield develop, and that could potentially be dangerous. And so I'd be more okay with bringing the offensive or the defensive line back and letting plays develop downfield because we have guys like Tre'Davious White and Poyer, Micah Hyde, Levi Wallace, Taron Johnson, who are going to be downfield that I know and trust will be able to defend against those passes. I'm not entirely sure, again, because of our run defense, how we've been all season. I'm not sure how much I trust bringing the pressure on a consistent basis against a quarterback like Lamar Jackson, who will scramble out of the pocket. And then you have to have guys that I just mentioned, like Poyer and White and Hyde and Johnson, come from, the backfield, or not the backfield, but come from deeper down the field. And at that time, Lamar Jackson's already going to have the first down. They're going to convert a first on a third down. So it's extremely difficult to game plan against him. And that's, again, not even taking into account the running backs. The tight ends are very heavily used in a Baltimore offense. Not so much this year as in last year and in years previous, but still heavily utilized. And wide receivers too, the passing game. You can't count that out. So it's hard to plan against the Baltimore Ravens, but I know that they're cooking something up good over there at One Bills Drive in Orchard Park, and the Ravens are coming to us, and it seems like it's going to be a crappy weather day for when they're here. A lot of snow. I think it's a polar vortex, so should be an interesting game nonetheless.
Anything else you want to talk about?
I mean, we can talk about anything that you really want to talk about. I mean, like I said, I'm more of an off-season guy. I'm really into the draft. I'm really into like the personnel, like the front office type stuff. Um, and this year's draft is really weird. I think it would have been weird prior to COVID or without COVID being a factor. But you have people that are now talking about Trevor Lawrence not even going to or going number one overall. And the Jets still potentially, if they want to move on from Sam Darnold, still potentially going into or being able to get Trevor Lawrence. He didn't end up getting the Heisman. That ended up going to a wide receiver. A lot of people are looking at other quarterbacks because Trevor Lawrence lost that game a couple of weeks back. And for some reason, this draft, I think, would have been still as equally crazy without COVID being a factor. But I just don't know. I think the Bills are going to probably go for something on defense. Definitely somebody that can help stop the run in case something happens to Starr next year, or if he, if COVID is still a factor and he opts out again. I would think that they probably go for somebody on the defensive side of the ball that can help them with their run defense. I think they probably also end up drafting a tight end because for some reason they don't trust Croft enough to put him on the active roster. And again, Knox has an issue with catching. So unless he improves that in the offseason, I see them potentially also going with a tight end. So I don't know. Is there anything that you want to talk about? Any Sabres stuff? Like I said, the Sabres are playing tomorrow. So is there anything that you want to talk about with the Sabres? Anything that you want to talk about with the Bills? I don't know anything about lacrosse or baseball, so don't ask me about that.
I think the Sabres start on Thursday.
Do they?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
yeah,
so the
so,
NHL season starts tomorrow, but the Sabres
Yeah.
won't play until Thursday. Okay.
Yeah. How do you think the Sabres will do, like standings wise, when the season's over?
Well, so let me check this because I had to check this today. It's almost, I don't want to say impossible to answer your question, but it kind of is. And that's because we don't know how the playoffs are going to look, right? Because we're not playing anybody from the Northwest or Central divisions. The Sabres are only playing people from the East. So we're playing Boston, New Jersey, the Islanders, the Rangers, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Washington. We're only playing those teams in the regular season. I think in terms of our division, the East, I think Philadelphia is at the top. I just don't know. I also predicted the Rangers being somewhere in the top 2 or 3. I think probably most definitely the top 5. I could be very wrong. And I say that because last year on the Rivalry podcast, prior to COVID, I said that the New Jersey Devils were going to be Eastern Conference champions. And they ended up being like bottom 5 in the NHL. So not a great pick and guesstimation by me. So I could be wrong about the Rangers. I was told I was wrong about the Rangers. But Buffalo on paper should be good. But the question is, will they be good? Because we've seen them go on 10-game win streaks and then lose. There's 56 games this season. You can't go on one 10-game win streak. You have to go on 2 or 3 10-game win streaks, and you're in the playoffs. So I don't know where they'll be in the East, and I definitely don't know where they'll be in the NHL for the rest of the NHL, because I don't know what the playoff format's going to look like. I don't know if it's going to be adjusted again. I don't know if they're doing a bubble. I don't know what's going on. I haven't heard anything, in the NHL definitely has not released anything on that yet, because I think that their hope is they'll be able to have a normal Stanley Cup playoff by the time we come around to that in 21, later in this year.
Thank you for watching this episode of Let's Talk 716 Sports. Thank you to my special guest, Ryan McCaughill from the Soviet Union Sports.
Hey man, thanks for having me on. I mean, this isn't my first time, so if anybody wants to watch that episode, they can go back on your YouTube and find it. It was definitely a good time for sure, because I'm back again. So obviously, I enjoy coming here and talking with you. But I mean, we'll have to do this again, maybe sometime halfway through the NHL season, to see where my predictions are and see if I'm absolutely wrong about the Rangers, like I was wrong about the Devils again. So we'll definitely have to get together again for sure.
And I want to give a shout out to my friend and editor and producer, Ranting Ron.